Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is HANDCUFF and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 16 waiver wire pickups for the 2024 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the best available pickups at the running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, kicker, and defensive positions as we approach Week 16 in order to give ourselves a greater opportunity to capturing a victory in Week 16 and advancing to the fantasy football championship weekend, Week 17. Over the course of today's episode, we'll talk about these players on an individual basis. If you're looking for my thoughts on a specific player, travel down to the description of the video. We have timestamps available there. But let's go ahead and let's begin at the running back position, talking about someone that is going to be benefiting from an unfortunate injury that took place in Week 15, that being Jerome Ford. But this isn't the only player going into Week 16 that is going to be benefiting from injuries. Again, players like Nick Chubb, Jalen Waddle, Alvin Kamara, Zach Ertz, David Montgomery, Patrick Mahomes, and Geno Smith all sustaining injuries. And I'm sure there are many more players that are going to pop up on the injury report as we progress towards Week 16 Sunday. Therefore, we want to go ahead and combat some of these injuries by picking up players of positional need. Therefore, we begin with our number one, Jerome Ford, who again is going to be benefiting from the fact that Nick Chubb is out for the remainder of the season with a broken foot. As of yesterday's game, obviously exited the game, did not return. And Jerome Ford, in his absence, 7 carries, 84 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 2 receptions for 20 receiving yards, and 17.4 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. How much more could we ask of Jerome Ford? Now he has an opportunity of taking over this backfield entirely. Earlier this season, he had an opportunity of doing so. And when he has been given an ample volume of touches over the course of the season thus far, in games in which he has had 12 or more touches in a singular game, in a half PPR, averaging 9.8 fantasy points per game. Thus far this season, of course, has been very efficient on the ground, averaging 5.18 yards per carry over the course of the 2024 year. So if Jerome Ford is available in your league, currently rostered in only 42% of Yahoo leagues, 43% of sleeper leagues, if in fact he's available, please pick him up and do yourself a favor, because as a starting running back of the Cleveland Browns, with their upcoming schedule taking on the Cincinnati Bengals and Miami Dolphins, he certainly will be of value in a top 36 capacity as we continue for the remainder of the 2024 season. All right, let's talk about the next running back, MCCORMICK, who plays later tonight. If you have an opportunity of picking him up, again, currently only rostered in 43% of Yahoo leagues, 48% of sleeper leagues, if in fact you can pick him up before tonight's games take off, again, that would probably be in your best interest, considering he will be the starting running back of this offense going forward. We do know that Alexander Mattison will be active, but like I mentioned in this most recent Hidden Gems video, MCCORMICK being one of those players, there's going to be a lot of opportunity going in his direction because the head coach and, of course, the offensive coordinator are committed to the running game and getting MCCORMICK as many opportunities as he can handle. Over the course of the last 3 weeks, weeks 12 through 14, he's been averaging 5.5 yards per carry and 3.66 yards after contact per attempt. It very much so is reminiscent as to what someone like Zamir White was doing this time last year. MCCORMICK will certainly be a fantasy darling for the next couple weeks, especially considering his upcoming schedule, taking on Jacksonville and New Orleans. Neither of those teams can stop the run, so hopefully he comes out with a fantastic performance tonight to continue the momentum for the remainder of the season. All right, now before we go ahead and continue, speaking of later tonight, of course, the matchup between the Las Vegas Raiders and Atlanta Falcons, and of course, the Minnesota Vikings taking on the Chicago Bears. If you guys want to go ahead and potentially follow some of the couple entries that I'm going to be putting together in regards to our underdog plays, again, I'll go ahead and share them with you guys right now. But for those of you who are trying to tail those entries, be sure to go ahead, travel down to the description and check out Underdog today. At this current moment in time, if you use code Andrew, make that first time deposit minimum of $10. Not only will you be able to claim the first time deposit offer, but also get my ranking sent to you from my email directly to yours every single Sunday for the remainder of the season. These Sunday, of course, rankings will include half PPR, full PPR, all-encompassing rankings by position, by tier, including flex. So if you're trying to take advantage of the opportunity, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your current eligibility based on your location. If in fact you are not eligible because you've used my code or somebody else's code in the past, or your current location isn't eligible, you can always check out the Patreon link down in the description in order to find all those rankings available there. Of course, later tonight, if you sign up, you can take advantage of the free play of 0.5 total yards for Kirk Cousins. But my 2 favorite plays going into tonight are the following. First and foremost, in regards to the Chicago Bears taking on the Minnesota Vikings, these are my 2 favorite plays. TJ Hawkinson surpassing 39.5 receiving yards, and of course, Keenan Allen surpassing 4.5 receptions, both going higher on those totals. Then the next best play, in my opinion, in regards to the other game between the Atlanta Falcons and Raiders, consists of Michael Mayer, higher than 1.5 receptions, Drake London, higher than 4.5 receptions, and of course, Kyle Pitts going higher on his receiving yards. These are the 2 entries that I've gone ahead and put together, and hopefully they'll go ahead and hit for us later tonight. Thank you very much. Okay, let's continue on with the running back conversation. conversation with KENDRE Miller, running back of the New Orleans Saints. Look, yesterday, Alvin Kamara left the game about 12 minutes remaining in the fourth quarter with an apparent groin injury. If said injury is going to potentially hold out Alvin Kamara for some semblance of time, whether it is this upcoming week or for the remainder of the season for fantasy purposes, again, their upcoming schedule consists of taking on the Green Bay Packers and Las Vegas Raiders. KENDRE Miller could certainly be a value, especially considering how much this offense wants to utilize their running back within the receiving game. KENDRE Miller, in the absence of Alvin Kamara, 9 carries, 46 rushing yards, 4.6 fantasy points, and played 23 of the last 27 offensive snaps. Of course, we did see a little bit of utilization out of Jamal Williams, but going forward, if KENDRE Miller, currently only rostered in 11% of Yahoo leagues, 16% of sleeper leagues, is going to be the running back who fills in the absence of Alvin Kamara. Again, for those of you who have Alvin Kamara on roster, be sure to go ahead and pick him up in order to handcuff him just in case Kamara cannot play this upcoming week with said groin injury. Of course, KENDRE Miller will be of certain value going into our upcoming matchups. All right, the next running back I wanted to mention, the thumbnail of today's episode, it is Craig Reynolds, running back of the Detroit Lions. Of course, earlier today, we got unfortunate news that David Montgomery tore his MCL. It's a season-ending injury for the remainder of the year. Jahmyr Gibbs will be the primary RB, probably handling 80+% of the overall snaps and touches. But in the absence of David Montgomery, there's going to be another running back that probably gets themselves a couple touches here or there, and that would be Craig Reynolds. He's currently rostered in 0% of leagues, mainly because, again, this backfield has been a two-headed monster for the entirety of the entire situation. And even though we all know that injuries could take place, we are all very confident in the idea that even if David Montgomery was to go down, Craig Reynolds is not going to have that much value in comparison to the boost of value that Jahmyr Gibbs will now be able to feature for the remainder of the year. So when we look back at the 2023 season, there were a total of 4 games in which either Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery missed the entirety of said game. In those contests, Craig Reynolds was averaging 7 attempts per game and 5.7 fantasy points per game. So we have seen over the course of the last 2 seasons, in the absence of a starting running back between Montgomery and or Gibbs, Craig Reynolds got himself a little bit of opportunity. Not enough to where he is designated to be a solid fantasy option within a given week. And quite frankly, considering what we have seen out of David Montgomery thus far this season, he is very much so reliant on touchdowns. So you would assume that if you were going to even consider Craig Reynolds to be a starting option, he would have to find the end zone. The upcoming schedule for the Detroit Lions consists of the Chicago Bears and San Francisco 49ers. If we were going to be in a blowout situation, sure, Craig Reynolds could certainly find himself value, but he's not David Montgomery. He doesn't have the skill level of David Montgomery. Therefore, they won't utilize him in that sense. So going forward, we're going to see a lot of Jahmyr Gibbs handling touches within this backfield and playing majority of these games. All right, moving on to the next running back I wanted to talk about, TYJAE Spears, currently rostered in 44% of Yahoo leagues, 46% of sleeper leagues, coming off an incredible performance of 24.2 fantasy points. Obviously, Tony Pollard started in that game, scored a touchdown early, but then Tony Pollard had himself a re-aggravation of the ankle injury. If that is going to continue to take place, TYJAE Spears could certainly be a value considering he had himself 6 receptions for 87 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns on Sunday. He ran 27 routes in comparison to Pollard's 7. And if going into the upcoming matchups against Indianapolis and Jacksonville are going to promote to more potential looks for TYJAE Spears because Tony Pollard could miss time, of course, this is someone that could be a value for us. Now, I don't expect Tony Pollard to miss time. He's been a tough son of a gun thus far this season, and I expect him to continue to play. But in the event in which that takes place, of course, TYJAE Spears could be significantly more valuable than the number 5 spot. But until we get more information regarding Tony Pollard, he'll sit at number 5. All right, the final player I wanted to mention is Dameon Pierce. There was a little bit of an injury scare in regards to Joe Mixon. The only reason I purely wanted to mention Dameon Pierce is this is a kind of placeholder for handcuff running backs. If you guys have not picked up your handcuff running back to your blue chip player, for example, picking up Kenneth Gainwell for Saquon Barkley, picking up Justice Hill for someone like Derrick Henry, picking up Dameon Pierce for Joe Mixon. If you have not accomplished that yet, do yourself the favor and pick them up just in case. Going forward, we're hoping that we'll never have to utilize these handcuff running backs, but we want to have the insurance policy available on roster for the remainder of the season just in case something crazy was to happen. For example, having KENDRE Miller when you have Alvin Kamara would have been smart. Having the potential of Jerome Ford when you had Nick Chubb would be smart. Having the handcuff running back when it's purely available in the vast majority of leagues would be doing yourself a favor for the upcoming remainder of the season. All right, let's move on to the wide receiver conversation. Beginning with our number 1, we have our hidden gem of this most recent week, ROMEO DOUBS, who's coming off of a fantastic performance of 2 receiving touchdowns and 17.5 fantasy points. Obviously, only rostered in 38% of Yahoo leagues, 51% of sleeper leagues. This time last week, that number was significantly higher. As week 15 surpassed, people were dropping ROMEO DOUBS. This time last week, I was saying if ROMEO DOUBS is available, please pick him up because I don't expect him to be available. Therefore, I didn't throw him up on screen. But I did mention if he's available with Christian Watson, Adam Thielen, pick him up. But hey, people wanted to go ahead and drop him, and they probably made a huge mistake going forward. As we progress, again, he is returning as the #1 receiving option and #1 wide receiver of the Packers offense. And as we progress for the upcoming schedule of New Orleans and Minnesota, both top 5 matchups at the wide receiver position, you will anticipate Romeo Doubs to continue his streak of success this week. The second wide receiver I wanted to mention is RASHOD Bateman, wide receiver of the Ravens, who's also coming off of a 2 receiving touchdown game. 5 targets, 3 catches, 80 yards, 2 touchdowns, 21.5 fantasy points. Of course, Lamar Jackson, having thrown 34 passing touchdowns thus far this season, really helps the overall upset of RASHOD Bateman, considering he has caught 7 of those 34 touchdowns. But over the course of the season, he has really been a boom or bust player. Even though he has 4 receptions of 20 yards or fewer, he also has 3 receptions of 40 yards or more thus far this season. He is a big playmaker in the event in which they're taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers and they're going to give him opportunities deep down the field. Of course, he will be supremely valuable, but in the absence of a touchdown, certainly has been kind of a up and down player over the course of this season. Then we move on to our number 3, Jalen McMillan, who recently has also found himself with a 2 receiving touchdown game a couple weeks back, but this most recent week, again, another consecutive game of receiving touchdown. Even though this time last week, I mentioned I don't expect Jalen McMillan to be scoring, continuous weeks of touchdowns because they have someone like Mike Evans on this team. Regardless of Mike Evans' incredible performance, Jalen McMillan is getting plays designed for him to find himself open and score touchdowns. And as long as that is going to be the case, and they're taking on the Dallas Cowboys this upcoming week, the 5th best matchup at the wide receiver position, you would anticipate that Jalen McMillan can certainly still have value within this offense, rostered in only 8% of Yahoo leagues. Then we have QUENTIN JOHNSTON. Now, as we progress towards this upcoming Thursday's matchup against the Denver Broncos, there is a possibility in which Patrick Surtain could miss because of the injury that he sustained on Sunday. If that is going to be the case, QUENTIN JOHNSTON will be of incredible value, along with a guy like Ladd McConkey. In the event in which Patrick Surtain is available and in coverage, it may not be the best overall week to start QUENTIN JOHNSTON, unless, of course, you are desperate enough to make said play. Then we have our number 5, Calvin Austin. In the absence of George Pickens, as we progress, we're still going to need another receiving option to kind of fill in the void. Over the course of 3 of the last 4 games, we have seen Calvin Austin produce 9 or more fantasy points. As long as the opportunities continue to go in his direction, whether it is with the touchdown or not, I anticipate him to get himself a lot of receiving utilization, especially within the upcoming matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, in which, of course, the Pittsburgh Steelers will be having to throw the ball for the majority of the game in order to keep up with that high-powered offense. Then we close out the wide receiver conversation with Tim Patrick. Look, Tim Patrick, for another consecutive week, scoring a touchdown. Back-to-back games with a receiving touchdown, continues to get red zone priority. As long as this offense continues to score at a high rate as they have as of late, you would anticipate that someone like even Tim Patrick, even though there is Amon-Ra St. Brown and there is Jameson Williams, you would anticipate that potentially Tim Patrick can continue to see himself red zone utilization going forward. All right, let's move on to the tight end and quarterback conversation, beginning with our number 1 tight end. And quite frankly, the only tight end you should be picking up and potentially playing this upcoming week, it is Brenton Strange, coming off of an incredible performance in the absence of Evan Ingram, who underwent a season-ending surgery this most recent week. Brenton Strange in his absence, 12 targets, 11 catches, 73 yards, 12.8 fantasy points going into this week and for the remainder of the season will certainly be of high value. This week takes on the Las Vegas Raiders in week 16. They are the number 1 tight end matchup, allowing over 16 fantasy points per game. Pick up Brenton Strange if you need a tight end, and he's an auto start this week at a top 12 capacity. Then we have Michael Mayer. Speaking of the Las Vegas Raiders, they'll be taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars are a top 5 tight end matchup, allowing over 14 fantasy points per game. So later tonight against the Atlanta Falcons, if Michael Mayer is going to continue to find himself semblance of value, this most recent performance in week 14, 9 targets, 7 catches, 68, if that trend can continue, he can certainly be of value as an automatic pickup and play for those of you who are in a desperate situation, who've most recently lost potentially someone like Evan Ingram, or of course Zach Ertz, who is in the concussion protocol going into week 16. The final tight end I wanted to mention is Grant Calcaterra. They take on the Washington Commanders earlier this season. Dallas Goedert against the Commanders, 5 catches for 61, 8.6 fantasy points. They are the 11th best matchup at the position, allowing nearly 11.5 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Again, Calcaterra could easily be a pickup and play for those of you interested. Then let's move on to the quarterback conversation. 3 quarterbacks that played incredibly well in week 15 and hopefully will continue the momentum considering they are taking on advantageous matchups. You have Aaron Rodgers, who's coming off of his best performance of the season with over 30 fantasy points, putting up a performance in which, of course, he was able to dial in the second half with Devontae Adams and tear apart that secondary of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And hopefully going into this week's matchup against the Los Angeles Rams, they could put up very similar production. They are the 14th best matchup at the position, allowing nearly 15 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks through the air. Of course, this most recent week, Aaron Rodgers also also getting himself rushing production. Kind of a crazy week, but a hidden gem that was definitely found. Then we have Mac Jones, who also had himself a little bit of rushing production, but ultimately is coming off of his best performance of his season. Of course, continuing into this upcoming weekend's matchup against the Vegas Raiders, should certainly find value with Brenton Strange and, of course, Brian Thomas Jr. Then we close out with Cooper Rush, who does take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have been a great defense over the course of the last couple weeks. They have found themselves weaknesses in their secondary, but ultimately they are still giving up the second most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Again, Cooper Rush coming off of his best performance of the season thus far. He's potentially available for those of you who are in quarterback need. All right, let's move on to the kicker and defensive conversation with Brandon McManus, Will Reichard, and of course, Zane Gonzalez. Brandon McManus has scored 10 plus fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games for fantasy purposes. Going into this weekend's matchup, you would anticipate against the New Orleans Saints, a lot of scoring will occur for the Green Bay Packers attack. Then we have Will Reichard, who again, if you could pick him up later tonight, prior to the game, you can very easily avoid the Tuesday/Wednesday waiver priority conversation in regards to Reichard. Pick him up now in order to utilize him for the upcoming games. Then we have Zane Gonzalez, who again, we know thus far this season, Commanders kickers have been fantastic. If Greg Joseph is going to be the starting kicker for this offense going into this week, of course, then we'll pick up Greg Joseph later on in the week. But as of right now, Zane Gonzalez is not someone that you need to put a waiver claim on. Just keep an eye on him, because if in fact he is going to play, he's someone that I want to pick up and potentially have on roster for this week. Then closing out today's video, let's talk about defenses. The Green Bay Packers, of course, has been a defense I've been talking about for 2 weeks straight. We wanted to pick them up in order to take on the Saints. Spencer Rattler will most likely be starting. Of course, the Commanders squandered their opportunity this most recent week, but I can guarantee you the Packers will not do the same. Then we have the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, the Bengals as a defense have been incredible in terms of fantasy point production, and now they have an opportunity of taking on Jameis Winston and or DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Whoever they throw out at quarterback, we would anticipate the Cincinnati Bengals defense to find success. Then we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who very similarly have found a lot of success as of late. They have really gotten themselves into a playoff form as a defense, as an offense, and continuing on. Even against the Dallas Cowboys, I would anticipate success. Now, I want to continue by talking about defenses. Potentially, if they are still available, the Arizona Cardinals taking on the Carolina Panthers could be a potential play. The Indianapolis Colts this upcoming week taking on the Tennessee Titans. And of course, the Atlanta Falcons taking on the New York Giants. Regardless of who plays at quarterback, whether it is Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito, Tim Boyle, could certainly be of value. But again, the Falcons defense over the course of this year just hasn't been great. So even against an easy matchup, you would anticipate that there's a possibility for a struggle. Just like we most recently saw the Washington Commanders and Baltimore Ravens defense squander their opportunities in this most recent week. All right, that's going to cover it for my Week 16 waiver wire targets. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I'll be back later tonight live streaming on the channel starting after the Monday night games conclude. If you guys have any questions regarding Week 16, be sure to swing on by. I'm more than happy to help. Outside of that, I'll see you tomorrow for my top 36 running back rankings. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.